2021 marks the 70th anniversary of one of the most amazing coincidences in the history of comics. This is a tale of how two identically named yet dramatically different boys found their way into the hearts of millions. The story of the two Dennis the Menaces. On March 12, 1951, the readers of 16 American newspapers were introduced to an adorable scamp with a blonde cowlick, a sunny disposition, and a propensity to get himself into well-intentioned mischief. Over the next few years, a rapidly expanding newspaper readership would grow fond of a cast of characters that included his loving parents and good old Mr. Wilson, a cantankerous retiree whose gruff exasperation masks his affection for his 5-year-old neighbour. Meanwhile, thousands of miles across the Atlantic, a new feature in the Beano, a children's anthology comic selling more than 1 million issues every week, introduced the world's naughtiest boy, an unruly, badly behaved tearaway with, frankly, few redeeming qualities. Although dated March 17th, the issue actually appeared in shops on the very same day the American comic strip debuted, March 12th. The British Dennis, selfish, mean-spirited, and given to bouts of bullying, couldn't have less in common with his comparatively angelic American counterpart, even down to their choice of canine companions. Whereas the stateside Dennis has a big and amiable Airedale named Ruff as his faithful sidekick, when the British Dennis finally acquired a dog, it was Gnasher, a stray, jet-black, Abyssinian wire-haired tripe hound who bites anyone and everything and is every bit as devilish as his owner. So let's take a closer look at the cartoonists who conjured up these two contrasting characters and the history of their iconic creations.
Hank Ketcham, creator of Dennis the Menace, was born in Seattle, Washington in 1920. And all through his younger years, everyone, including his parents and teachers, knew that Hank was going to be a cartoonist when he grew up. And his goal was to work for Walt Disney Studios. With that goal in mind, he went to the University of Washington and majored in art. After his freshman year, he decided it was the right time to go get that job at Disney Studios. So he packed his bag and hitched a ride to Burbank, California, and went to Disney Studios, expecting to get that dream job. Unfortunately, they didn't hire him. But Hank didn't give up. Walter Lantz Studios, that produced the Woody Woodpecker cartoons, did hire him, and he stayed there for 1.5 years and learned everything he could about animation. Then he went back to Disney Studios, and they hired him. During his 4 years there, he got to work on the Donald Duck cartoons and 3 of Disney's classic films, Fantasia, Pinocchio, and Bambi. Then in 1942, he left Disney to join the U.S. Navy and was stationed in Washington, D.C. for 4 years. While there, he met and married Alice. After serving his term, they moved to Westport, Connecticut, where Hank began his career as a freelance cartoonist, drawing cartoons for the major magazines like Collier's and Saturday Evening Post. And little Dennis Ketcham was born there in 1946. 2 years later, Hank decided to move his family back to California. They bought a home in Carmel, and he continued his freelance career from his home studio. Then in 1950, when Dennis was 4.5 years old, one day his mom put him in his room to take a nap. She went back a couple hours later to check on him. When she opened his door, she saw that he hadn't slept at all. He had demolished his room. Alice rushed into Hank's studio and said, "Your son is a menace." Hank thought for a second. Dennis is a menace? That sounds like a great idea for a cartoon character. And that's when he created Dennis the Menace. And on March 12, 1951, Dennis the Menace made his first appearance in 16 newspapers around the country. Within a year, he was in 100 papers. Since then, Dennis has been in over 1,000 papers worldwide in 48 countries and translated into 19 languages. Not only in newspapers, but in comic books too. In 1959, Dennis was so popular that CBS television network produced a half-hour weekly Dennis TV show starring Jay North as the Menace. This photo shows Hank with the actors who played Mr. Wilson and Henry. In 1993, Warner Brothers produced the very popular Dennis the Menace movie, with Walter Matthau as Mr. Wilson. Hank Ketcham was very happy with the movie because it introduced Dennis to a whole new generation of fans. 1 year later, Hank officially announced his retirement. In 2010, the U.S. Postal Service issued a sheet of stamps that highlighted 5 of the classic comics, and Dennis was there. And this year, we celebrate Dennis's 70th anniversary.
First published in Scotland in 1938, the Beano is the world's longest-running weekly comic with more than 4,000 issues to date. By the end of the Second World War, the comic, thanks to its anarchic humour and cavalcade of unruly kid characters, was a staple for millions of children the length and breadth of the British Isles. Founding editor George Mooney had the idea for a new character when he heard a British music hall song with the chorus, "I'm Dennis the Menace from Venice."
Does Dennis the Menace from Venice, a gay gondolier with gold rings in his ear, he will sing you a song as he pushes along his gondola.
Mooney liked the name and charged sub-editor Ian Chisholm with developing the character. Chisholm turned to cartoonist David Law, but was dissatisfied with every sketch he saw. The eureka moment arrived when the two were brainstorming in a Dundee pub. Inspiration struck Chisholm as he scribbled a sketch of a knobbly-kneed boy with dark, spiky hair on the back of a cigarette packet, and the Menace was born. After a little experimentation, Law gave the boy a distinctive black and red sweater, outsized shoes, and a devilish grin. The energy and anarchy of Law's comic strips spoke volumes to a generation of post-war kids, and the character's popularity soared. Meanwhile, the alternate Dennis had become a sensation in the States, and in 1959, the newspaper comic became a hit sitcom starring child actor Jay North, his strawberry red hair bleached blonde for the show. When the series aired on UK television, the title was changed to just Dennis to avoid confusing British viewers. It was an accommodation that, down the years, would be repeated. In the 1990s, the Dennis the Menace movie was called simply Dennis on release in Britain, and reciprocated, with the British creation typically being known as Dennis and Nasher outside the UK. As with all comic creations, the character's look has changed somewhat from David Law's early incarnation, as a series of artists, David Sutherland, David Parkins, Jimmy Hansen, Tom Patterson, Barry Appleby, and Nigel Parkinson, have interpreted the character over the last 7 decades. The computer age has also spawned CGI versions of the incorrigible rogue, as Dennis has entered the realm of animation. As times have changed, so has the world of Dennis. The corporal punishments meted out to the miscreant Menace, Dennis would frequently feel the weight of his father's slipper, have disappeared. Similarly, it was long since recognised that the bullying of characters like Softy Walter was inappropriate, even though Walter, more often than not, thwarted his spiky-haired nemesis to emerge victorious. In today's modern Britain, the homegrown Dennis the Menace remains as popular as ever, as new generations of youngsters discover the scallywag and their parents indulge in nostalgia. Merchandise has ranged from toys and games, to collectibles and figurines, to postage stamps, to household goods and fashion wear. It is of little surprise that the official Dennis the Menace fan club attracted more than 1 million members. Through the comics and their annual anthologies, the world's naughtiest boy continues to wreak mischief and mayhem. For someone who has just turned 70, Dennis the Menace is in remarkably good shape. Across the Atlantic, since Hank Ketcham's retirement in 1994, the syndicated American feature has been in the hands of erstwhile assistants Ron Ferdinand, Marcus Hamilton, and Scott Ketcham.
Hello everyone, this is Ron Ferdinand here, the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, and I just want to say that I'm an honor to be part of this celebration of Hank Ketcham and Dennis the Menace. I thought instead of just blabbering for 10 minutes, I would take you on a little visual journey through my journey with Hank, and I promise it won't be long, but I thought it would be more interesting than just watching me talk. Anyway, so I figured I'd start over here. It was 1981. I graduated from visual arts, and I subscribed to Cartoonist Profiles, as all cartoonists did. Thank you, Judd Hurd. And there happened to be an interview with Hank Ketcham in this issue. And it was a really good issue, and Hank had moved back to Pebble Beach from Switzerland, where he had lived, and he had set up a training program. So, I was reading the article, and in the article, which is very rare, I think, he puts his address in there. So I'm sitting in my apartment in Jackson Heights, New York, in Queens, and I see he puts his address. So I said, what the heck? So I went out and bought a couple of Dennis books, and he wanted to see pencil sketches of the characters, which is what I did. So I sent him, these are the actual sketches I sent him, and I put them in an envelope, and I thought, well, that was, cast your bread upon the waters. So I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just told him that, I was graduate in visual arts, and I was looking for a job in cartooning. Anyway, that was the end of that, and then lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, I get a letter from Hank, which is right here. I have it. I still have it. And he says, Dear Ronald, your package of Dennis samples arrived this morning, and I want to congratulate you on your good efforts. You can imagine my astonishment. As you well know, Dennis and his friends are not the easiest to draw. There are many subtleties, and you have caught many of them right on target. I mean, by this time, I was like blown away. Anyway, since my interview with Cartoonist Profiles, I have located 2 talented artists who are currently working here. It may be that another opening may occur. So in that regard, send me your information, which I did right away. And after that, I figured, I just wait. And then a couple of weeks later, I got another letter from him, and he sent me a few gags to rough out, just to see what I could do with them. So this was one of them. So the gag was 2 ministers sitting there, and he says, and as I came to you and asked you your salary receive, the Mitchell kid yells, I want a root beer. Anyway, so he said it was one of the gags. So I did my version of it. I just roughed it out and mailed it back to him with a couple of others. And I just waited. I didn't know. And a couple of weeks later, he sends me this, which is his critique on the gag, with his personal notes here, which I saved, of course, and very, very polite criticism on my. And then he sent me the finished, which he decided to do on it, which was amazing to see his actual approach to it. So we corresponded for a while, and then in August of '81, he asked if I wanted to come out there and for 2 weeks and train. So which I did. I was excited, absolutely. So here I am, a kid from Queens, flying out to Monterey, to the most beautiful place in the world, and he put me on the comic book, and this was a comic book script that we had. We got the scripts. Fred Toole was the writer, and it was Karen Matchett, Brian Lum, and I, and the 3 of us working on the comic, and I did this for a year. And then after that, he asked if I would be interested in starting on the Sunday. So, of course, this was a dream come true for me, which I did. So that was in '82, and when I started on the Sunday. And I've been there ever since. And working with Hank was a dream come true, directly with him in the studio. And one of the funny things was, when he had Henry mowing, lawn mowing, grass cutting, all this stuff, I lived in an apartment my whole life, didn't have a house. And he would always say, Ron, you got to get yourself a lawnmower and see what it's like. You have to start doing all these house things. So it was very funny. So eventually, my wife and I did buy a house out there, and I got to see firsthand what living in a house was like. So that was that. And now I figured I'd just show you some of the sketches which I collected from him, which I treasure. These are actual Hank Ketcham sketches, which I kept. That's Hank's showing me how to draw a telephone. And just his pencils, which were so beautiful. And just watching him pencil was just, an art course in itself. Just imagine watching Hank do these beautiful pencils. That's George Wilson as Douglas MacArthur. And then he'd say, Ron, why don't you just go get a People magazine and draw faces? You have to start experiencing. And the single line. He was always emphasizing the single line. And so I just have all this treasure of material, which I saved and value to this day. All this, you can imagine, all these different Hank Ketcham sketches, and I have a couple of daily panels, roughs, which I kept. And so, you know, I mean, working with Hank was just, you couldn't ask for better training. I mean, I did 3 years with visual arts, but working with Hank for a couple of months, and it was like, you know, just learning from scratch and learning from the master, Dennis Teddy Bear, he drew. And just to show you what a sensitive and great boss he was, I just have a few of these notes which I kept from him. This was, he would leave, sometimes he'd be away, and I'd come in and I'd find this on my desk in the morning. Ron, I'll see you guys 9:45 a.m. Tuesday. So he was always very considerate. And one year when he gave me a Christmas bonus, he said, Ron, please accept this modest stocking stuffer with my best wishes, and thank you for your continued and ever-improving good work in the Dennis salt mine, and for maintaining your humor in spite of constant criticism and bellyaching. Hank. So, you know, he was a gem. He was a very sensitive dream boss. And one year, Andre and I went to Disneyland, and when we got back to the studio on Monday, he had left this on my desk, which said, welcome back, Ron. Hope it doesn't take you too long to get back into the swing of things. So this was what I found working on my desk. So it was a dream come true, and Hank was a great boss. And I actually bought this on eBay, which was a Hank pencil. And another great thing he did was, he had this hanging in his office. He did a daily with George Wilson in a Mickey Mouse hat. So Disney sent him this. So Disney, you know, they sent it to Hank Ketcham Best Wishes. So it was hanging in his office for years. So when we moved from the studio back to our homes, he said, Ron, would you like this? So, you know, he was generous. He was to a fault. And he was a great man. And I'm honored to have worked for him. And to close on a sad note, the night before he passed away, I got this fax on him. Which was, I was working on a Margaret Sunday, and this fax came in the afternoon on May 31st. And I got it, and it was just a little, you know, need better action, funnier pictures. Maybe they'll even get me, you know. So this was his suggestions for poses for this Sunday I was working on. And then I received it like I was getting all my faxes, because I had moved back to New York by that time. I moved back. I was out there from 81 to 96, and then 96 I moved back east because Hank closed up the studio, and we had faxes, so I could... Anyway, so we were faxing from 96. So this was 2001, and I got the news that he had passed. So you can imagine what a treasure this is. I don't know if this may have been the last thing he ever drew, but I treasure this. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and I just want to say that thank you for your attention, and I hope visually it was interesting, and again, it was an honor to be part of this presentation.
Hi, I'm Marcus Hamilton. Welcome to my studio here in Mint Hill, North Carolina. This is where I draw the daily Dennis the Menace panels. And before I show you the process of drawing Dennis, I wanted to tell you how he came into my life. I had a 21-year career as an illustrator, doing paintings and drawings for magazines, book covers. I loved it. Thought that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. But in the early 90s, computer graphics came on the scene and put me out of business. So here I was at 50 years old, wondering what I was going to do with the rest of my life, but I didn't give up. No. On June the 22nd, 1993, I was watching TV and saw an interview that was being done with Hank Ketcham, the creator of Dennis the Menace, and he was talking about the movie that was coming out that week. But in the interview, they asked him what he wanted to do now that he had drawn Dennis for over 40 years. He said, I want to find somebody to draw Dennis so I can travel and paint and do some traveling. Well, the minute he said that, I went straight to the telephone, called my cartoonist friend Jim Scancarelli, who draws Gasoline Alley. Jim and I had worked together in our first job back in 1965 here in Charlotte at the TV station. I thought Jim might have Hank Ketcham's phone number, and he did. So I dialed that number out in Monterey, and Mr. Ketcham answered the phone. I said, Mr. Ketcham, I just saw the interview where you said you'd like to find someone to draw Dennis. If you're serious about that, I would love to have the opportunity. He said, well, send me some samples of your work. Let me see what you do. So I put together a package, some of the illustrations, mailed them out there. A week later, I got a big white envelope with Dennis the Menace on the outside. My heart started beating a little faster. I opened it up, and there were 4 typewritten pages from Mr. Ketcham. He said, Marcus, I like your work. If you're serious about pursuing Dennis, show me how you would draw him in 4 different situations. And he gave me the little captions to go by. I was ecstatic. I couldn't believe Hank Ketcham, one of the most respected cartoonists in the business, was willing to take a chance on a total stranger he had never met. But if he was willing, I certainly was too. I did the drawings, sent them out to him. He wrote back and said, I will hire you to take over drawing the Monday through Saturday Dennis the Menace panel when I retire. So a year later was when he announced his retirement up in New York City, that he would be turning over the daily panels to me, and Ron Ferdinand would continue drawing the Sunday strip that he had been doing since the early 1980s. And that's how the process came into being. Now, I would like to show you exactly what's involved in drawing these daily Dennis the Menace panels. Now, the process I was going to tell you about doing the daily Dennis the Menace panels starts with our gags, the jokes. We have professional writers that send us their idea every month, and we select the ones we want to keep. I have a shoebox full of them over there. But to pick the one that I want to use, then I go to my sketch pad and read them all, and I come up with an image, a small image. And this one says, Dennis is showing Mr. Wilson, a stick figure drawing that he did in school of Mr. Wilson. And he says, the teacher asked us to draw one of our best friends. So that would be Mr. Wilson. So my sketches look like this. Once I get 6 sketches done, I scan them in and print them out. And I also type in the caption underneath each one so that I can then email this to Hank Ketcham Enterprises, which is really Mrs. Ketcham, Roland, who took over ownership of Hank Ketcham Enterprises after Mr. Ketcham passed away in 2001. And Scott Ketcham, their son, who is also on the Dennis team. So once they approve the sketches or make small changes to it, then I enlarge each one of them on the copy machine. This was the rough sketch. And then I put a sheet of tracing paper over that and come up with the final sketch that I'm going to use. And then I put a sheet of Bristol board, just like Mr. Ketcham used to do. Put it over that, turn on my light table. Now this light table actually came from Mr. Ketcham's studio out in California. And here's the sketch underneath. I get my pens. I have one pen that I draw the border with. And this is exactly what Mr. Ketcham used, the croak wheel pen with the Gillette number 170 pen point. And I just dip it in the ink and start drawing. And the end result looks like this. When I get all 6 of the daily panels done, then I email them to a place in Orlando, Florida, Reed Brennan Associates. They scan them all in and print out proof sheets that they send to all the newspapers around the world that run Dennis the Menace. And that's the process. Now, there are 2 more things that I want to tell you before you leave. One of them was when Mr. Ketcham flew my wife Kay and I out there to meet him for the first time in 1993. It was interesting to be there with Mr. Ketcham, but he gave me some information. He said, I want you to remember, when you start drawing Dennis, have fun while you're drawing, because if you have fun, it will show in your work, and the readers will pick up on that, and they'll read Dennis every day. If it stops being fun, they will pick up on that, and they'll stop reading your comic. He was so right. I remember that every day when I start drawing. The second thing I wanted to tell you about that I'll always remember When Mr. Ketcham announced his retirement up in New York, and I was there with him and Ron, I asked Mr. Ketcham, what made you decide that I was the person you're going to give this opportunity to? He said, Marcus, you were the only person that responded to that television interview. I couldn't believe it. No one else paid attention to Mr. Ketcham's comment about wanting to find someone to draw Dennis. So I was very blessed and fortunate. And I cannot imagine any opportunity that would come along to me that would be more gratifying and inspiring than to get to draw Dennis the Menace every day. And I'm planning to keep drawing him every day, and I hope you'll keep reading him every day. Thank you.